She told me, I need freedom to figure out what I really want in life. I replied, you should take it. Then I removed myself completely. Months later, she came back, but found out freedom meant losing me permanently. I need freedom to figure out what I really want in life. She said it like she was reading it off a menu. Not like she was ending something. Not like she was looking at a man who had rearranged his entire existence around her. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I said, you should take it. She smiled. She actually smiled. And that smile, that small, relieved, grateful smile, told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in her life. What happened next, she never saw coming. And honestly, neither did I. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. We had been together for 3 years. I was 29. She was 27. We lived in Brooklyn, 2 blocks from the water, in an apartment that smelled like coffee and old wood floors. That's all you need to know about the beginning. Her name was Serafina, and before you form a picture of her in your head, she wasn't a villain. That's the hardest part of this whole story to explain. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't cold. She was someone who had never quite figured out what she wanted, and she had a talent, maybe a gift, maybe a flaw, for making that everyone else's problem while still seeming completely innocent. I had loved her for 3 years with the kind of consistency that men don't get credit for. I showed up. Every single time. When her job fell through in the spring of our 2nd year, I was the one who sat with her at the kitchen table for 4 hours building her resume from scratch. When her mother got sick, I drove 6 hours to Connecticut and back in a single day because she didn't want to go alone and couldn't afford to miss work the next morning. When she wanted to pivot careers and go back for her master's, I sat with the numbers for 2 weeks, figured out how to make our budget work on one income if it came to that, and told her I was in. I never once said, look at everything I do for you. Because that's not how I was built. I just did it. And somewhere in the quiet, invisible accumulation of all those things I did without asking for applause, she started to mistake my steadiness for something she could take for granted. I didn't see it clearly then, but I was starting to feel it. There's a difference between a woman who loves you and a woman who is comfortable around you. I was starting to understand that Serafina had confused the two. It started, the way a lot of endings start, with her changing. Not dramatically, not all at once, just small things. She started going out more on weekday nights. Not every week, just enough that I noticed. She made new friends, which was fine, which was good, except she seemed reluctant to introduce me to any of them. She'd come home late, not drunk, not disheveled, just lit up in a way she hadn't been with me in months. Like she'd found a frequency she could tune into out there that she couldn't find at home anymore. I asked about it once. Just once, casually, while we were cooking dinner. You seem happy when you come back from those nights. She said, yeah, I'm just finally building my own social life, you know? I feel like I lost myself a little. I nodded. I said, that's a good thing. And I meant it, because I genuinely wanted her to have a full life. But I remember setting down the wooden spoon and thinking, quietly, to nobody, when did I become a symbol of the life you lost yourself in? I didn't say it out loud. I should have. Then came Bramwell. I didn't know his name at first. I knew him as this guy from her new friend group. She mentioned him the way you mention weather. Casually, incidentally, without intention. Bramwell said the funniest thing tonight. Bramwell knows this incredible rooftop bar in Williamsburg. Bramwell's been through a lot. He's actually really interesting. Now, it's not angry. It's not even sad. It's the look of someone who has already decided, who has already rehearsed, and who is now just here to inform you. She said, I need to talk to you about something. I put my book down. I said, okay. She took a breath. She said, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About my life. About what I want. About who I am. And I feel like I need freedom. I need space to figure out what I really want. I love you, but I feel like I've been operating inside this relationship for so long that I don't even know myself anymore. Silence. I looked at her for a long time. I noticed that she didn't look heartbroken. She looked relieved, like she'd been carrying that speech in her chest for weeks, and she was glad it was finally out. And I thought, not immediately, but somewhere in the seconds that followed, she's not asking you to give her something. She's asking you to release her from something. There is a very big difference. I said, you should take it. She blinked. She had expected, I think, negotiation. Maybe tears. Maybe me asking what I did wrong, or what I could change, or whether we could try therapy. She said, yeah? I said, yeah, if you need freedom to figure out what you want, then you should have that. I'm not going to hold you here. She nodded slowly. She said, I still love you. I just need. I said, I know. And then something quiet and permanent shifted inside me. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a door closing. She moved out 14 days later. Her friend OnDealing helped her. I carried boxes. I was polite. I was calm. I shook OnDealing's hand. I helped Serafina get her bookshelf down the narrow staircase without scratching the wall. When the last box was in the car, Serafina turned to me outside the building and said, this doesn't mean it's forever. I just need to figure things out. I said, I know. She hugged me. I hugged her back. And as I stood there with my arms around her, I made a decision so quiet she couldn't have heard it even if she'd been listening. I decided that when she drove away, I would begin removing myself. Completely. Not out of anger. Not out of punishment. Out of respect. For myself. Here's what I mean by removing myself. I deleted her contact. Not blocked, deleted. I unfollowed her on every platform. I didn't post anything about the breakup. I didn't call mutual friends to talk about it. I didn't sit in our apartment spiraling. I called my friend Torrance, who has a way of listening without inserting himself, and I said, we're done. I'll tell you the full story sometime. Right now I just needed to say it out loud. He said, I'm here when you're ready. That was the whole conversation. Then I sat with myself. For days. And then weeks. And I did the work that men are told they don't do. The actual internal excavation. What did I miss about her specifically versus what did I miss about the idea of her? Or had I given too much without checking in with myself? Where had I confused patience with passivity? Or had I seen the signs and looked away because it was easier than facing them? I was honest with myself. Brutally. And what came out of that process wasn't bitterness. It was something closer to clarity. I understood what had happened. I understood my role in it. And I understood that the person I wanted to become had no room for someone who needed to find themselves by first getting lost on someone else's time. By month 2, I was a different version of myself. Not a new person. A sharper version. I'd been running in the mornings again, something I'd let slide over the previous year. I'd gone back to a project I'd shelved. I'd been working on converting a raw commercial space in Bushwick with Marcellus, a friend of mine who'd been trying to get me to invest time and energy into something tangible and real. I started cooking again. Not for anyone else. Just for myself. I started reading things I'd put off. I started saying no to things that drained me and yes to things that didn't. And slowly, quietly, without any announcement or Instagram transformation post, I started to actually like who I was becoming. Torrance noticed first. He said, over drinks one night, you seem different. Like the static is gone. I said, what static? He said, the kind you have when you're with someone who doesn't quite see you. I sat with that for a long time after. I should tell you about Lysandra now. Because she matters. Not in the way you might think. She wasn't a rebound. She wasn't a revenge plot. She was just a person. I met her through Marcellus at a dinner at his place in Fort Greene. She worked in urban planning. She was sharp and funny and had this quality I didn't have a word for at first, and then eventually found the word. She was present. When she talked to you, she was actually in the conversation. Not performing being in the conversation. Not half present while composing something else in her head. Just there. We talked for 4 hours that night about things that had nothing to do with being in a relationship or wanting one. We talked about the city, about architecture, about the particular kind of loneliness that comes from living in a place with 8 million people. Before I left, she said, I really enjoyed this. I said, me too. She said, we should grab coffee sometime. I said, yeah, we should. And the ease of that, the total absence of strain, told me something about how far I'd come. I wasn't desperate for it. I wasn't terrified of it. I was just a person, open to something good, without needing it to fix anything. It was around month 4 when I heard from Serafina, not directly at first. Through the city's usual gossip channels, a mutual friend named Elwood, who has never once in his life possessed the ability to mind his own business, mentioned that Serafina had been going through it lately. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. He looked at me like he expected more. I had nothing more to give. Then about a week after that, she texted me. I still had a different number saved under her name. Actually, I should be accurate. I didn't have her saved at all, so her message came through as an unknown number and I almost didn't read it. But I recognized the area code and something made me open it. It said, hey, I know I have no right to reach out, but I've been thinking about you a lot. I hope you're doing okay. I miss you. I read it twice. I put my phone face down on the counter. And I finished cooking my dinner. I didn't respond that night. I sat with it. And I want to be clear about what happened inside me when I read that message. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't satisfying in the way that some people might expect. It was closer to sad. Like watching a light on a shore that you used to navigate by, realizing you don't need it anymore. I responded 3 days later. I said, I'm good. Hope you are too. She replied within minutes. She said, I've been a mess honestly. Can we talk sometime? I said, what would talking do? She said, I made a mistake. I think I confused the problem. I thought the relationship was the thing weighing me down. But the relationship wasn't the problem. I was. And I understand that now. I read it. I read it again. I said, I believe you. She said, then can we try again? Long pause. My pause. Not for effect. Because I genuinely sat with it. And here's what came up when I sat with it honestly. I didn't want to. Not because I was still hurt. Not because I was punishing her. But because the person she had left, the one who would have quietly accepted that message, who would have exhaled with relief, who would have said, thank God, come home. That person didn't exist anymore. I had changed. Not into someone bitter. Into someone who knew what he wanted. And what I wanted was not a relationship built on the rubble of her self-discovery tour. What I wanted was something that had never required me to be placed on hold while someone figured out whether I was worth choosing. So I wrote back. I'm glad you understand that now. I genuinely am. But I've moved on. And I don't mean that as a punishment. I mean it as a fact. What we had was real. What's happened since then has also been real. And I can't unbecome who I've become to go back to where we were. She said, what does that mean? I said, it means the door isn't there anymore. Not because I locked it. Just because I built something new where it used to be. She called. I let it ring. She called again. I picked up that time. She was crying. Not performed crying. Real, unsteady, breathing through it crying. She said, I thought you'd wait. And there it was. That word. Wait. I said, I know you did. She said, I just needed time. I said, I gave you time. She said, but you were supposed to be there on the other side of it. And I had to think about how to say what I said next, because I wanted it to land without cruelty. I said, Serafina, you told me you needed freedom. I respected that. I didn't chase you. I didn't beg. I didn't make your journey about me. But you made an assumption that I would pause my life while you lived yours. And I didn't. That's not cruelty. That's just me living. Silence. Then she said quietly, is there someone else? I said, that's not really the question. She said, it kind of is. I said, there's a version of me that doesn't have space for what we were. That's more relevant than whether there's someone else. She cried harder. I sat with it. I didn't apologize for it. Because apologizing for becoming yourself is not something a person should ever do. We talked for a while longer that night. Not because I owed it to her, but because I'm not a cold person. She told me about the months. Bramwell, I was right. There had been something there, unformed, never fully realized. But the pull had been real. It hadn't lasted. It hadn't even technically started. He had turned out to be, in her words, emotionally 11 years old. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say anything. She told me she'd been going to therapy, that she'd been working through patterns in herself, the way she sought novelty when things got stable, the way she equated comfort with stagnation, the way she had spent her whole adult life mistaking the feeling of being settled for the feeling of being trapped. She said, I did the work you probably always wanted me to do. I said, I never wanted you to do it for me. She said, I know. That's what makes it worse. You never tried to fix me. You just loved me. She said that last part very quietly. And I'm not going to pretend it didn't hit me somewhere real. But real doesn't mean reversible. I'll tell you the part one hadn't told her. The late backstory. The thing that, when I finally looked at it clearly, made my decision feel not just right but inevitable. 2 months before she gave me the I need freedom speech, I had found something. Not on her phone. Not from a friend. In our own apartment. She'd been journaling. Physically, in an actual notebook. She'd left it on the bathroom counter one morning, open. I want to be clear, I didn't read it. I'm not built that way. I closed it. But before I closed it, my eyes had already read 2 lines because they were directly in front of me and already processed before I thought to look away. The 2 lines were, I wonder sometimes if I'm staying because I love him or because I'm afraid of what leaving looks like. Bramwell makes me feel like there's still a version of me I haven't met yet. I closed the notebook. I put it where I found it. I went to work. I never mentioned it. And here's what's important. I never used it as evidence. I never confronted her with it. I never poisoned the next weeks with it. I just knew. I knew from that point on that I was living on borrowed time inside something she was already halfway out of. And I chose, consciously, not to beg for the half she was still giving me. I just loved her. Fully. Until I didn't need to anymore. When she called that last time, she asked, "Did you ever see it coming?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Why didn't you say something?" I said, "Because you needed to get there yourself." She said, "And now I'm here and you're gone." I said, "Yeah." She said, "That's not fair." I said, "No, it's not." And I meant that genuinely. It's not fair. None of it is. She did the work. She grew. She became someone who could have been really good in a relationship. Just not in time. And I grew too. Into someone who didn't need her arrival to validate his departure. By the time spring came around again, Lysandra and I had been spending real time together. Not rushing anything. Not labeling it before it was ready. Just building. The way things get built when both people are actually paying attention. One afternoon, she and I were sitting on a bench in Prospect Park, and she said, out of nowhere, "You seem like someone who's been through something." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Not damaged. Just deliberate. Like you thought carefully about what you wanted and then got specific about it." I said, "I think that's the most accurate thing anyone's ever said about me." She smiled. Not the smile I'd seen on Serafina the night she asked for her freedom. Different. This one was warm at the edges. Present. I don't tell this story to make Serafina the villain. I said that at the beginning, and I mean it at the end. She wasn't the villain. She was a person who needed to grow up in a specific way and chose to do it on a timeline that didn't account for anyone else's life continuing without her. That's not evil. That's just human. And I am also just human. A human who decided, quietly, without any announcement or ceremony, that loving someone fully did not obligate him to wait indefinitely on a shore they chose to sail away from. There's a conversation I had with Marcellus near the end of all this. We were working late at the Bushwick space, paint-covered, tired. He said, "Whatever happened with Serafina?" I said, "She came back." He said, "And?" I said, "There was nothing to come back to." He looked at me for a second. He said, "Was that hard to say?" I said, "It used to be." He nodded. He handed me a paintbrush. We kept working. She sent one final message. Months later. Just 3 lines. "I heard you're doing well. I'm genuinely happy for you. I think about the apartment sometimes." I read it. I thought about the apartment too. The coffee smell. The old wood floors. The way the afternoon light came through the window at a particular angle in October that made everything look like it was inside a photograph. I thought about all of it. And then I put my phone away. And I went to meet Lysandra for dinner. She had told me she needed freedom. I had given it to her without hesitation. What she hadn't understood was that my hands, once open, don't reach back for what they've already released.